Hi, and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, John Euler sits down with Ed Sparrius to discuss the Free to Change study. It's a study where 78 ex-LGBT people all had the chance to discuss and answer some very pertinent questions. What's this study all about? We're going to get into it right after these. ExposingSoji123.com provides all the info you'll need to protect your children and family from this transgender ideology. ExposingSoji123.com has done all the work for you, extensively researched and well written by a concerned father, Pierre Barnes, who's been researching for the past 3 years, providing this invaluable information in this time of great need. With dozens of letters, pre-written to every official you can think of within your province, the documents provided are fill in the blank so you can amend and send. It's that simple. Plus, while you're visiting the ExposingSoji123.com website, you'll also find info on teachers' misconduct cases related to sexual abuse in your local area, and the pornographic books that you've been hearing so much about in your local school libraries. Make your voice heard and count for the children to the highest levels of provincial and so-called federal political leaders, health ministers, school board officials, and more. ExposingSoji123.com, where the facts are real. Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm Brad Wilder. Today, John sits down with Ed Sparrius. Let's bring them in right now. Guys, you've got a lot to discuss with this brand new Free to Change study that Ed has conducted. 78 ex-LGBT people coming together to answer some very, very important questions to kind of get a handle on, well, several different issues. But I think the main one for you, John, that you want to discuss here today is what?
Well, we're looking at the topic of conversion therapy, supposed conversion therapy, right? Those that have sought to limit any discussion, any providing of alternative information, have used this term, used this phrase, really ultimately to limit choice. And Ed, thank you for joining us. You are from Australia, so I should say good evening from North America, but good day down under. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invite, John. Really appreciate it.
And Ed, you and I have a mutual friend, Dr. Elizabeth Taylor, not the movie star, but a brilliant woman.
This is a little bit of history, a departure into history, but there were two twins, and the story, there's a tragic story actually, the Reimer twins, and they were having surgery on their genitals when they were very small. They were 8 months old. It's often said that it was a botched circumcision, but I think it was some urological issue that was being corrected. Anyway, and the surgical instruments failed and mangled the penis of one of these boys so badly that they were referred to John Money to find out what could be done. And he recommended that because this one particular boy had been so badly damaged, that it would be more kinder to feminize him, to cut off the entirely and to turn him into a girl. And as long as he was affirmed as a girl and never told that he had ever been anything other than a girl, then this was thought to be an entirely satisfactory way of treating this child. And every year, Dr. John Money would check up on the family, and he would write a report that was published very widely in international medical circles about the success of how Brenda was developing beautifully, and Brenda liked to keep her room tidier than her brother, and all of these gender norms were playing out until puberty hit. And then Brenda became suicidal and depressive until eventually her parents decided to tell her the truth. Now, Brenda to re-identify as David Reimer, and it was in adulthood that he and his brother revealed that John Money had done some things which are really very highly questionable to them as children. So he'd obliged them to take their clothes off and to mimic sexual positions with each other, and had taken photos of this. And when he was questioned about this later, he said, well, this was so that they could learn the correct sexual behaviors to do with boys and girls. So this is, two twin boys, effectively. Anyway, so they were traumatized by this, and they both in adulthood committed suicide. The brother who hadn't been operated on became schizophrenic, and he killed himself first, and then David did later. But before he did, they went public and they explained everything that John Money had been doing. Now, in the meanwhile, once David decided to identify as a boy, he was not going to have anything more to do with John Money, and so he told his parents that there was no way he was going near John Money anymore. Now, John Money every year had been informing the medical community that his experiment was successful, that actually he had proven through this experiment on unwilling human victims that gender was entirely a matter of nurture and nothing at all to do with nature. And he never corrected that in the international record. So when David said, no, when Brenda stopped wanting to be Brenda, John Money never corrected that and said, look, guys, stop. Sorry, it was all a terrible mistake. So that gave rise to sex change surgeries. In fact, that was John Money was working at Johns Hopkins University Hospital, and this was where all the sex change surgeries started.
She was the person to connect me to Judith, the late Dr. Judith Riesman.
So how did we get here to where we're at today? Because I don't think pornography has always been such an epidemic cancer within our society like it is today.
No, not at all. We were, up to the end of the Second World War, a conservative Judeo-Christian nation. The turning point for all that was Dr. Alfred Kinsey, his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, 1948. He was the father of the sexual revolution, and therefore the father of everything that has come from that. And certainly one of the key things was pornography.
Once a biologist who studied gall wasp, Kinsey's obsession with sexuality led him to found the Kinsey Institute for Sex Research at Indiana State University. What people to this day are not aware of were the methods he used to collect his data.
And I looked at the graphs that he provided, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34 tables. And I said, wait a minute, that's a 2-month-old baby. How does he know a 2-month-old baby did or did not have an orgasm? And then table 34, a 4-year-old child, 26 orgasms in 24 hours. That's an around-the-clock experiment.
Wow, that's torture.
That's torture, you bet. He also actually employed bona fide pedophiles to do what they did to children for his so-called data.
Kinsey wanted to prove that we are sexual from birth.
Ed, you decided, and so we'll set the stage so people can see, I might as well hold up here. This is what we're talking about. And what's doubly important for this, I should say, is I contributed to this, or you asked. And so I'm very heartened that this particular, and it's a beautiful book or booklet. It's full color. And this was given to members of Parliament in Australia. And it's available online. We're going to show people where they can access this. But the title of it, do you want to describe it? Let me see if I can make sure it's not reflected. There it is, Free to Change, Survey of 78 ex-LGBT people. And it was a very scientific study because you all found yourself in Australia, and New Zealand's gone the same way, Canada the same way, and the U.S. is heading there. And so many Western countries have found themselves having to battle with this tidal wave, the tsunami of the trans stuff, and then the legislation that inevitably follows that limits freedom. Yet they're not going to talk about that. And Ed, you had sort of had enough of that, and you decided to spearhead a study and gather professionals together to speak to that issue, to inform members of Parliament. Did I summarize that well?
Yeah, really, really well, John. Here in Australia, of course, we had the same-sex marriage legislation go through a number of years ago, and we all stood back and thought, well, we'll see what comes next. And the conversion therapy legislation was only a couple of years afterwards, which, of course, stops people who are in the LGBT lifestyles, if they really don't want to be there for whatever reason, from being able to seek assistance of any sort whatsoever. We've got a university here called La Trobe University, and they put together what they called a study, an academic study, that justified this legislation. And we looked at that, and it's an absolutely appalling study. If this is an academic bit of work, La Trobe should hang their heads in shame. It has no statistics. It just has cherry-picked comments. And basically, if you look at it, all it's really doing is criticising churches and talking about a few people's experience. So we thought what we would do is run a proper study and invite as many people as we could to contribute to it. And we had 78 people. We would have had a lot more, but we were very stuck for time. The legislation was foisted on us out of the blue. And because we didn't have much time and we had a little problem with security on the website, so we pulled it down for a month or so and then put it back up. So within about a 5 to 6 month period, we had that many people turn up. If we had the same time as La Trobe, we probably would have had a couple of hundred people. But their experiences were very, very eye-opening. They really countered the narrative that's being pushed in the media and into governments at the moment.
And that's crucial. The numbers are crucial for people to understand that you could have, because the website was basically being attacked, you had to shut it down, but you could have had a couple of hundred. So this study, even still with the numbers at 78, that's a very good size sample because these are people's lived experiences. And what you're saying is you saw this legislation, this quote unquote anti-conversion therapy legislation being rammed through Parliament, and there was this shoddy research study, and that's what was being presented to members of Parliament to persuade them to go along with this. And you felt, wait, there needs to be a counter argument. And so you all set to work. And let's talk about that, because then, Ed, we're going to also have you talk about and bring us up to speed now in retrospect, what has happened. So anytime legislation that's coined or uses the term anti-conversion therapy, and they get that into legislation, Canada has it, New Zealand has it. Aside from the terminology, we're going to find out really the real purpose of this, what's the goal, and what is the net effect of this kind of legislation that's based upon flawed research. Therefore, this research is well done. So talk to us about let's talk about the research itself. I'll even bring up, when you give me the go-ahead, I'll bring up some of the visuals that we have prepared.
Yeah, I just can show you how La Trobe performed. They spent nearly a year. They hunted around looking for people who said they'd been hurt by conversion therapy, in other words, being talked out of living their gay lifestyles or whatever. They, in that year, could only produce 15 people. Once they found out that our study was on the way, we found out through contacts that we had, they ran a second study and engaged Macquarie University, and they were paid money by our government, the Victorian government, who's a very socialist government. They were paid and funded to do that study. And after 2 years, they produced a sum total of 35 people who claimed they'd been hurt. So we, in 6 months, with no money, just volunteers, with people who were really eager to share their experience, produced these 78 people. The point that we make is this: we're told that no one changes. If you're gay or if you're transgender, this is innate and you never change. And we were simply saying, well, if you can find even one person who changes, that throws the narrative down the drain. But if you've suddenly got almost 100 people, then you have a serious problem. The governments are saying no one changes. But these people are saying, well, I did, and I changed for the better. So I'm not really sure exactly whether you want to go straight into the statistics, but there was 3 goals that we were looking for, 3 things. One was, do people actually change from living LGBT lives? And yes, absolutely they do. Do they have improvements in their lifestyle? Absolutely. We took statistics, whereas the La Trobe study took absolutely no statistics. We took statistics. We had a series of questions that people came to the website. They would answer those questions, and they were all quality of life questions. And then also, was it a long-lasting change? And again, a great number of the people had left their lifestyle 10 years ago, many 30 years ago. And so if people are saying, well, you know, you might leave the LGBT life, but it's only for a short time, you're going to go back again, that's simply not the case for this group. everyone in this group left their lifestyle and have stayed out of it. That's contrary to the narrative being pushed by our governments.
That's right. And what part and parcel of this, because they call it anti-conversion therapy, it's not so much aimed at individuals living their lives that decide to make a change, but it's those that, as they are thinking through things, as they're noticing certain things about themselves, about their emotional state, their mental health, that maybe they become concerned about or they feel distress, they're probably going to seek out some help, some professional help. So the legislation that this study was designed to inform was really, and this pertains to Australia, all Western countries, right? Because this is a very strategic move on the part of those that don't want people to be free to change, and they don't want anybody to come along and assist with normal therapy, with normal exploratory therapy. So anti-conversion therapy is geared at mental health professionals. Basically, it says this: hands off. Don't talk to them. Don't work with anybody in an alternative lifestyle, because if you do and they decide to change on their own, so free to change, and you, Mr. or Mrs. Therapist, you've converted them away from their true identity and self. And so the idea of being free to change also then means they should be free to explore what is or isn't in their best interest. And that runs counter to the narrative, because this anti-conversion therapy tries to paint a false narrative, which is once gay or once heading down a certain path, they should always be going down that path. And what I say is, we need to ensure that people's choices and decisions align with their values and goals. We need to be about the business of empowering people. So in the mental health field, we're not here to convert anyone. We're here to help empower people to figure out what's in their own best interest, not limit them. And they need to be able to be free to reconsider.
I was born biologically female. I began transitioning and taking hormones when I was 18 years old. Growing up, I couldn't pinpoint what my issues were, and then I realized that it might be a gender issue. When I turned 18, I did go to Planned Parenthood. I just stated that I had gender dysphoria, and they gave me testosterone a week later. Before I went on hormone therapy, I wasn't required to see any therapist or any sort of a doctor at all. So about a year and a half after I was on hormones, I decided to see a therapist about getting approval for top surgery. I walked in on one appointment for half an hour, and then she emailed my insurance for approval, just like that. Even at this point, when I was passing as a man, I still had these doubts in the back of my mind that said, what if you're wrong? What if you made a mistake? In the end, I decided not to do the surgery. At that point that I decided to detransition and live my life as a woman again. Even as an adult, it took me a long time to figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. Kids especially need to see a therapist before making any sort of permanent medical decisions, like going on hormone blockers and surgeries especially. I mean, they don't even know what they want for dinner the next day, let alone what gender they are. The biggest mistake that I made was that I did not get the right amount of therapy or medical advice needed. These days, if you tell a parent if their child thinks that they might be transgender or has gender dysphoria, to wait and really consider it and maybe seek other therapy, you're just seen as transphobic now because you're not accepting people. I'm not anti-trans at all. I support the trans community very much, but I also support medical responsibility.
If you question this at all, you get labeled really quickly, correct?
You do, immediately as transphobic.
Why do you think that is?
I think that a lot of the transgender community, they push so much for acceptance that when you immediately, or anytime you start to question them, even if it's out of the goodness of your heart to try and make sure that they're making the right decision, anything that goes against their narrative is just immediately labeled as transphobic.
Now, after you started to transition, how else did you begin to change your life to live as a man?
I had changed my name. I started wearing a binder. I even moved cities because at the time I was very hesitant to actually come out to coworkers. So I moved about 4 hours away, got a completely different job, and introduced myself as a trans man.
Okay. And what happened when you began to schedule time to get a double mastectomy?
I haven't had any top surgeries, but I did get approved for it.
Okay, that's what it is. You got approved for it.
I did. I got approved. And how that worked, it was scarily easy to do because I had just called a therapist and I had scheduled one appointment, for like a 30-minute session to talk about it. And I essentially walked in. I said, I identify as transgender and I want to get top surgery. And we chatted for a bit, maybe for half an hour. And at the end of the session, she wrote me an approval letter to send to my insurance. And then I got approved just like that.
When you first started, you went in, you said, to Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
And they gave you testosterone immediately.
Yeah, I essentially just made a phone call and said, I want to transition. And it was immediately given. I got a prescription and went to pick it up like a week later.
Did they ask you questions? Did they do any psychological testing? Did they ask you why? What was your motive?
It was completely self-diagnosed. Well, self-diagnosed. I claimed that I had gender dysphoria and I wanted to transition, and they didn't really ask me any questions about it. I just called them and I said, when can I get this? And they just said they needed to write me a prescription for it and send it. And that's essentially
you
what
had
happened.
No proof that you were
I never
gender
saw a therapist
dysphoric.
about it.
You didn't.
Yeah, I didn't talk to anyone about it, nobody medically professionally. I had just looked up, I did some like trans research, I guess, into the transgender community and everybody online, and they just seemed so happy and successful. And at the time, I didn't see any information on detransition or any like the negatives about it. And so I kind of got completely wrapped into that.
Gender dysphoria can be a miserable way to live if that's what they're experiencing. And there are criteria for that. And one of the criteria is time, that is persistent across time. But you didn't have any of those criteria. You didn't demonstrate that. You didn't document that. You didn't have any professional that documented that.
Nope.
You just said, I want testosterone. They gave it to you.
Yeah, I had confused, because I had become uncomfortable with how society had seen me as a woman sexually. And I had confused that, being uncomfortable with my gender as gender dysphoria and being uncomfortable with my body. So I didn't actually have gender dysphoria. I had just confused myself into thinking that I did.
I don't know if it was actual dysphoria. Some of it, maybe it was. I still kind of feel it sometimes, but a lot of what drove me to transition in the first place was linked to a lot of mental health issues and a lot of stuff that I had going on that really should have been taken care of beforehand, but it was not for a variety of reasons.
Nobody in the medical or psychological field ever tried to dissuade me to offer other options, to really do anything to stop me besides tell me I should wait until I was 18. This is what Serrano was talking about when they discussed the medical system and how it shouldn't be gate-kept. I want to ask you, how many other medical conditions are there where you can walk into the doctor's office, tell them you have a certain condition which has no objective test, which can be caused by trauma or mental health issues or societal factors, and just receive life-altering medications on your say-so? Does that sound like gatekeeping?
And so this study, Free to Change, what you found, Ed, and we're going to go into that now, is that if given an opportunity to be able to freely choose a therapist of their own choosing, be able to freely explore whatever they want to explore, that sometimes you're going to have people that decide to reconsider an alternative lifestyle, and they not only are well-adjusted, they're happier because they were now able to explore that, and it now aligns with who they are, and it's lasting.
And look, you talk about counsellors and therapists. It's not just counsellors and therapists it targets parents. So if you have a child as a parent who suddenly, the little boy comes home and says, Mummy, I'm a girl, and you say, don't be silly, you're a boy, and you try and encourage him in that way, you can, down the track, or even if a relative discovers that, be dragged before the court. So it's just made aware that we haven't had much as far as legal action going on as far as we know. Keep in mind, a lot of this happens behind closed doors. We're talking about courts that aren't open. But what we have heard is there was a grandfather whose little grandson started talking about being a girl, and the grandfather apparently said to him, no, you're being silly. And he was dragged before he was summoned to explain himself. So this is very much targeting families as well as professionals. And then, of course, you've got in the middle of that, you've got the pastors in churches who are asking for preachers, coming and asking for advice and saying, look, I'm not comfortable being gay or whatever else. That preacher, if he was to say, well, I can help you with this problem, we can pray together, they then can be dragged before the courts and be charged. And in Australia, the punishment is quite vicious for an individual. In American dollars, it's around about 12,000 American dollars is the first time round fine. And for institutions such as a church, it's 650,000 American dollars. So the fine is quite hefty, and of course there's 10 years of incarceration in there as well if they really want to.
And to help really people or the context, and what you're describing is, and this has happened, and you can either have somebody genuine or a setup. So somebody attends a church and they begin to wonder the lifestyle that they're in doesn't mesh with their own spiritual values, or let's say they want to believe in the Christian doctrine of how one might conduct him or herself based upon what Scripture says. And they decide to go to the pastor and say, Pastor, I've been in this lifestyle. I don't know if I want to do that anymore. Would you counsel me, or would you pray for me? And if that pastor does either, and that person decides to leave the lifestyle, and what you're saying is with this legislation, then civil penalties and or criminal penalties can be brought to bear.
Yeah, and it's worse than that, John, because that person might want to leave the lifestyle. The pastor might be happy to assist them with that. However, a third person might take offence and report that situation, and the pastor then gets brought before the courts. And again, the pastor will not necessarily know who has brought that accusation, and he will not be able to defend himself and say, look, I'm sorry I didn't, or I'm sorry this was the circumstance. He is presumed to be guilty and somehow has to try and clear his name, and it's virtually impossible.
And that's why that's okay. This is like lawfare, right? They've used the courts to do what they couldn't do otherwise in this draconian kind of method. So this is used to silence anyone. And therefore, and same thing for pastors or therapists. So if I, as a therapist or as a pastor, or as you said, potentially parents, if they know that really then even possibly interacting with anybody in an alternative lifestyle, so much for inclusivity, that if, here I'm doing my job, or I'm a pastor, and somebody walks up to me and says, I'm in an alternative lifestyle, and I want to think through that. I want to rethink that. I don't know if that's for me. Then if I'm into self-preservation, part of that's normal, then I may not even choose to interact with that person.
Yeah, and I mean, the Christian life is very much about changing from one lifestyle to another. And so pastors would simply be doing this in whatever area, whether it's in someone who's got a drinking problem or a gambling problem or an abusive problem. This is a different problem that the person might see in their life that's looking for help. Pastor would naturally see that as part of their job. With the therapies, roughly 75%, and all these statistics, by the way, are in the study, and there's also a small summary that can be downloaded. But of the therapies,
Ed, as you're talking, let me go ahead and bring up where people can find this. Why don't you go ahead and share the address of the website?
Okay, so it's freetochange.org. So quite simple. You don't need to put all the www and all the extra in, just freetochange.org. The book you see on the left is the full study. The one in the middle is the summary. So the full study has about 120 odd pages. It's got a whole lot of information. John, you can.
That's the one I'm holding up right here.
Yep, and you can download that as a PDF. And so that has a preamble, the study, and it has then got some articles by yourself and a number of other academics and professionals. And then what we did was we made it available for the people who had left, who took part in this study, to give their testimonies. And so there's quite a few testimonies that are written in there, and we left them totally unedited, so we could not be accused of changing.
Did this change on your screen, Ed? I need to make sure, since this is...
Yep.
Okay, yes. There we go. So if somebody actually wants to have a PDF version of it, you can see over on the side, you have a lot of chapters. There's all the stats. And of course, I can't help myself. If you want to read chapter number 5, now, who would help with that? Right. So I helped contribute to that, but a lot of brilliant individuals were part of this. It's multiple chapters, very attractive book. And so it's available then at the site. Oh, those are the stats. We'll go into that. So they can download that. Let me see if I'm flipping through here. As a matter of fact, Ed mentioned about CAUSE, because CAUSE is the organization that you are a part of that helped spearhead this study.
Yes, so CAUSE, which stands for Coalition Against Unsafe Sexual Education, as it says in the title, was set up some years ago when we started finding the gender ideologies in the schools, and we've been attempting to, or we attempted to stop that. We weren't successful. We passed out quite a lot of flyers into our electorates when we had an election, and at the time we were very early on, before many other people were aware of what was going on, and so we like to think that we at least lit the flame, because over time many different organisations and individuals have suddenly started saying, what on earth is going on? We didn't know this was happening in our schools. We didn't know our kids were being presented with sexual material that, we couldn't even put some of this material on the TV and say to people, are you aware that your kids are being taught this, because it went against broadcasting and advertising standards, yet it's being put in front of our kids in schools. So that's what CAUSE was set up by a group of parents and interested people. And so we set up this website as an information website. It's, again, got a lot of information on it for people who are interested. Yes. A lot of good articles in there by professionals. You can see Professor Diana Kenny, and there's other people who have been involved in contributing to it. So that's our information website, and that's stopsafeschools.com. as opposed to the study, which is the freetochange.org. So we have two websites. The Free to Change was specifically set up to run the survey and produce the Free to Change study.
And as a disclaimer, so that people know, once this draconian law came into effect, you actually had to give over control and really oversight. You gave over these websites to organizations in the U.S., so you don't run these anymore.
Yes, we were concerned that we would be summoned before the courts, falling foul of the legislation, and we would have been forced to pull the sites down and possibly even to destroy the information on them. So to make sure that didn't happen, we handed them over to an American organization who looks after them now.
There we go. So Ed, your study, the Free to Change study, had over twice the number of participants than the La Trobe University study. And if people want to try to criticize you, this study has really solid stats. So why don't you walk us through what we're seeing for those that aren't familiar with stats, and we'll scroll through the pertinent, you can even tell me what slide you would like to go to. I should have shared the screen.
Sure. Here it shows you the demographics. We were very interested in getting a wide range of ages, wide range of nationalities, and obviously male and female, wide range of people's sexual experiences. We didn't want just one. We didn't want all homosexual men or queer people or whatever. And I should explain too, we stuck with just LGBT. We didn't want to have an ever-growing name, so we just called it 78 ex-LGBT people, but it encompasses all people in those sort of lifestyles. The study also shows here, it shows the ages of the people who are involved. It also talks about when they started the interventions, in other words, when they actually went and looked for help. And some people, by the way, didn't look for any help at all. They just left the lifestyle on their own. But about 75% of people had some sort of assistance, whether that was professional, whether it was spiritual, whether it was camps or whatever else. But most people needed some help from someone else. And so the point is, if now in Victoria, Australia, and other states as well, if people want to leave this lifestyle, they can't get that help. If they do, and certainly I'm sure some people in the background are still trying to help them, those people who are assisting are the ones that are going to face the courts if they get reported. And that's a huge problem. Again, here it shows we broke it up and told people what the identities were before their sexual orientation or gender identity before it started, where they went afterwards. And not everybody became heterosexual. You know, we get accused of trying to convert gay people and make them heterosexual. Some people who were gay did become totally heterosexual. They'll say to you, yes, I am totally heterosexual. Some people at the other end of the scale are saying, look, I'm still same-sex attracted, but I'm not living that lifestyle anymore. And the cohorts spread between those two extremes. And we were quite happy with it. That wasn't the issue. The issue was, did they leave the lifestyle and stop being part of that? And that was what we were looking for.
Hey, Ed, I got a real quick question for you. Ed, I need to know this, and I think the viewers should be aware of this as well. What was the average length of time that these people were part of the lifestyle, the LGBT lifestyle? Because I'm curious to know if this was a fad and people just, tried to open up with their own sexuality based on things that they've learned throughout the last few years, or whether they were actually in the lifestyle for, years on end where, they broke away and became, I guess, wanting to embark down that change.
Look, that's a fair question. Something we didn't ask them, but you can read that into the ages at which they started seeking assistance. I mean, people don't suddenly, at age 40, say, I'm gay. Most people would have lived that sort of lifestyle for quite a while. And so in there, we do have in the stats at what particular age they started looking for assistance. Yeah. And you sort of work it back from that. So if you've got a 35-year-old, you can be relatively sure that they've been involved in a homosexual lifestyle for a minimum of 5, if not 15 years. I think you'll find there's very few very young people in that group.
Wait. Why would you assume that? Why wouldn't you have asked that question? Why wouldn't you have got to that answer? I'm just curious.
It's not one that actually crossed our minds, to be honest, Brad. Maybe you should have shot that to us earlier on. We would have asked it then.
Well, I just think it's important because I think that understanding that over the course of the last 2 to 3 to 4 years, I mean, this has ramped up even more so. I mean, we say 2013 is when things took off, but we've seen more of this fad being accepted in society within the last few years, which leads me to the question of, I have gay family as well that live out in Vancouver, and they've been gay for a very, very long time, and I don't think that they'd ever go back now. One of them was previously married and a heterosexual, had a couple of kids, but now lives the lifestyle the way that they do. But I mean, I don't see those. I haven't heard of many people like that transitioning after a lengthy lifestyle like that. I'm really curious to know whether these are individuals who have, like I said, tried the fad. It's like putting on a pair of bell-bottom pants or jeans. I'm going to wear them for a while. They're hip. They're cool. Look at me. How about go along to get along? Was that something as well that kind of fits into this a little bit? People wanting to say, well, I accept it all, and they don't want to fight with anybody, so they just go along with it. Next thing you know, they try it out, thinking it's okay. Then they go, wait a minute, I don't want to be involved anymore.
If you read the testimonies, and there's also on the website, the actual study, if you download it, has written testimonies. The website also has audio and video studies. All of them talk about their lives, and you can, if you read those, you'll see that they've been involved in the lifestyle for quite a considerable time. So when I'm saying we don't have an exact number of years, these people certainly didn't do it as a fad and suddenly decided to bail out. They were people who were very involved.
So we see a lot of teenagers today doing that, Ed. We see a lot of kids like trying and testing the waters, and it's cool and it's hip for now. But again, it was, now all of a sudden it isn't anymore. I've seen kids like that over the last couple of years, my daughter's age, who have been in the same sort of position where one day they're They're calling themselves bisexual, and then the next day they're not.
I think that's because over the last 10 years or so, Brad, they've been pushing this stuff in schools, whereas the majority of people that came to our study, because we were wanting to see whether it was long-lasting as far as the change went, the majority of those people were in the LGBT lifestyles before all this stuff was being pushed in schools. I mean, it's cool now for you to be gay or to be a lesbian or whatever else, you know,
right.
And that's being promoted in schools, and that's really skewing all this. What that does to the kids down the track, when we know that those lifestyles are often associated with depression and anxiety and suicides ultimately, only time will tell. But I sort of shudder to think how these kids are going to end up when they're being pushed into this or dragged into this lifestyle by society saying this is a cool thing to try out. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question, because I think that, you know, there's going to be parents out there who are trying to understand where their kids are headed. You know, again, this lifestyle is a lifestyle, and you can test the lifestyle for a while and, you know, bow out if you decide to. But once the, I like to call them pimps or the groomers, they get a hold of these kids, and the next thing you know, they're forced into it, and they're pushed into it, and they're not released at all. So them coming out of it is a really tough thing for them to deal with, and I'm sure parents who know that their child doesn't want to be that way anymore is also having to go through a heck of a hardship to pull their kid away from it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
You just need to talk to John and ask him how many people he's counseled who've been sexually assaulted. You know, like we talk about the Catholic Church and some other places where these boys have been sexually assaulted, dragged into this lifestyle, and you'll find that a lot of those, particularly boys, because that's what happened there, they enjoyed the sexual experience but had huge guilt that goes with it, and anxiety and depression afterwards. And that's when you're saying the kids are sort of getting involved in this now, and then, you know, maybe later on it's a bit of a fad, we'll get out of it. The results that go on afterwards is quite horrendous for these kids.
At 13 years old, I was started on my very first intervention, which was Lupron, to block my puberty. Because I was already about 4 years into puberty by this point, the lack of hormones in my system essentially put me into a chemically induced state of menopause. So at 13 years old, I was experiencing symptoms that women usually only start to experience once they hit their late 40s to early 50s. Things like hot flashes, which were these uncomfortable hot sensations moving throughout my body, accompanied by these other sensations of itching and tingling, and sometimes even burning in my limbs, in my hands and fingers. It was incredibly uncomfortable in my day-to-day. And compared to going through what was essentially a very premature menopause, the testosterone felt amazing. I mean, I was taking a literal steroid. I was experiencing what you could call the gender euphoria that the transgender community often speaks of. I have 2 giant scars across my chest that remind me every day that I was butchered by the institutions that we all thought we could trust. I went to my surgeon because I was desperate for answers, and he just told me, "It's fine. That's completely normal. Just put Vaseline over it," which didn't make sense to me, but I thought that because nothing else was working, I might as well try it. That gave me a skin infection. It hasn't healed at all, and the wound, whatever it is actually spreading across my chest. I have no clue what's going on. I have nowhere to turn because I no longer have any trust in Kaiser Permanente, and I can't afford treatment out of pocket. I wish I could have my breast back, but a reconstruction may be riddled with even more complications, and no matter what, I will never be able to breastfeed my future children. Those organs are gone forever.
We'll have to interrupt the discussion at this point due to time constraints. Be sure to watch the continuation this important interview between John K. Euler and Ed Sparrius as they continue to review the findings of the groundbreaking Free to Change research study, next on Unmasking the Trans Movement.